sunshine, and a girl who threw herself into everything with infectious enthusiasm. Rachel grew to be 5'11" tall, so not only did she stand out physically, she had this spirit about her that made people describe her as truly remarkable. She became an accomplished softball player, in fact, even holding a world record at one point. People described her as athletic, adventurous, and fiercely independent. Rachel approached life with the kind of fearless curiosity that both terrified her parents occasionally and made them incredibly proud of her. She was said to have a knack for DIY projects that she could decorate and transform any space and make it uniquely hers, and I myself wish I had that quality. When Rachel was just 17 years old and working at a department store, she caught the eye of a colleague named Joe O'Reilly. He was 19 and 6'5" to her 5'11", and he was immediately smitten with Rachel. He asked her out repeatedly, and she turned him down just as many times as he asked. And then Joe discovered that Rachel played softball. Being of a persistent type, he simply showed up at her practice session one day and joined the team. Both Rachel and Joe were talented enough to potentially turn professional, and somewhere between games and practices, their friendship evolved into a romance. And eventually, in what I can only describe as incredibly romantic, at the top of the Eiffel Tower, Joe asked Rachel to marry him. I'm not sure I said, but we are in Ireland for this case, one of my dream destinations. So, Rachel and Joe's wedding followed, and they had 2 sons together in fairly quick succession. In 2003, the young family moved into a 3-bedroom bungalow in Knoll. I'm sure I'm saying that in the American way, not the Irish way. Rachel threw a barbecue at the house within weeks of moving in. She was very eager to meet and befriend her new neighbors. She sold Avon and Tupperware, and she was quickly becoming a familiar and well-liked presence in their community. Rose had worried when Rachel and Joe had first moved because Joe worked really long hours as an account manager at Viacom Outdoor Advertising, which meant that he often left before dawn for the gym and not got back home until late in the evening time. And Rose really wondered if Rachel would be lonely there, pretty much isolated with her 2 small children. But Rose said that Rachel never complained. She seemed to be happy. She was a private person by nature, never really one to air out her grievances, marital or otherwise. But some of Rachel's closer friends really sensed some cracks in the facade, and as we know, all that glitters isn't gold, and when things appear to be perfect, they very rarely are. Rachel seemed to kind of shoulder the parenting responsibilities largely alone. As I said, Joe was frequently absent. He did kind of project the image of a devoted family man, but he was gone almost all day, every day. So, nothing prepared anyone for what was about to unfold on that October afternoon. Joe O'Reilly's day began normally on October 4th of 2004. At 5:45 doesn't like her daughter to do something like this, to forget to pick up the children, or lose track of time, or not answer the phone. So as Rose is driving to the Lambay View house, she's kind of got a mixture of hope and worry. When she sees Rachel's car parked in the usual spot, relief kind of washes over her. Everything must be fine. Rachel was at home, right? She must have just lost track of time. The patio door stood open, and Rose called out as she knocked and entered. But there was no response. Rose said that the kitchen itself just looked wrong. Cabinet drawers were open, items were scattered across the floor. As she progressed further into the house, the living room was disarray with videos dumped into piles. The house appeared to be ransacked. Now Rose, being incredibly brave, I think, moved deeper into this bungalow, calling out her daughter's name. The bedroom that Rachel and Joe shared was at the back of the house, and as Rose stepped through the doorway, her life changed forever. And this is where you'll want to fast forward some. Rachel lay on her back in a pool of blood, so extensive that Rose could not initially determine if her daughter's face was turned to the side or if Rachel was face down. And there was blood everywhere, on the walls, on the ceiling. It even marked the bathroom tiles, which she wasn't in the bathroom, she was in the bedroom. I'm sorry if you can hear the wind. We're about to get like a really ridiculous storm. So Rose is understandably panicking. She reaches down to check Rachel's pulse, and she stated that her daughter's skin felt as cold as marble. Rose starts screaming, of course, and fumbles for her phone, first calling the police, then her son, Declan, and then her husband, Jim. So Rose is freaking, understandably, as I said. Her husband, Jim, is coming, Joe is coming, everyone is coming. But it was too late to save Rachel. Joe O'Reilly arrived at 2:30 p.m. with his two small sons in tow, and Rose told him what she'd found and stayed with the little boys as he ran into the house, shouting Rachel's name. When he came back outside, he told a responding officer that he had entered the bedroom, that he had touched Rachel's body to check for a pulse, and he had moved a box that was near her body into the boys' room, and he really hoped he had not destroyed any evidence. At this point, I feel like anybody and everybody is showing up, but I understand. At this point, Rachel's best friend Jackie, who is a nurse, arrived, and she checked Rachel and confirmed what everyone already knew. No pulse, no breathing. Rachel O'Reilly was gone. When Jim Kalali, I'm really not sure how to say that, reached the house, a police officer stopped him at the door and told him that the scene was too horrific for him to witness, and he did not need to see his daughter like that. Detective Sergeant Pat Murray was a crime scene examiner with years of experience, and when he entered the O'Reilly bedroom that October afternoon, even he was stunned. He said, quote, "It's a sight I will never forget. My God, her hair was matted in blood. You could see down to her skull, and you could see that there was severe force used to inflict it. This woman had no chance whatsoever. It was savage and cold and just unbelievable." End quote. administered such a beating, the viciousness of the assault was a pure display of hate for this woman. If you hate somebody that much, you're gonna know them. And he knew that this was no random attack. This was no stranger. This was not a burglary gone wrong. This was a murder. So of course, Joe O'Reilly was questioned the evening of the murder, and he provided his timeline. He'd left home at 5:45, went to the gym, and then went to work. And then he headed to the Broadstone bus depot where Derek Kearney was supposed to meet him. Now, Derek confirmed that he had spoken to Joe by phone when he arrived at the bus depot, and Joe said he was there, just in a different section of the site. So Derek never actually laid eyes on Joe. And Detective Murray, doing his due diligence, asks, does anybody dislike your wife? Had she had an argument with anyone lately? Might she have been seeing someone else romantically? And Joe's response kind of caught Detective Murray off guard, because he said, quote, "No, neither of us were having an affair." Well, Murray hadn't asked Joe if he was having an affair, so why is he admitting or not admitting to it? However, the truth emerged quickly. Joe admitted that he had been having a brief fling with a woman named Nikki Pelly. He said it wasn't serious, and he didn't want anyone to know. He had told Rachel 3 times that he wasn't having an affair, but the couple did have an argument the day before, and Joe had slept in the spare room the night before. So the next day, on October 6th, the police interview Nikki, and she confirms Joe's version. They had a relationship, but it wasn't serious. But as this investigation deepened, Joe O'Reilly's behavior gets so cuckoo. Just stick with me. 9 days after Rachel's murder, when the house is finally released from forensic examination, Joe invites Rachel's parents, Rose and Jim, over. Now, mind you, this house has not been cleaned up. Their daughter's blood is still staining the walls, the floor, and the ceiling. Like, who does that? Joe insists to Jim and Rose that this visit will bring them peace. It will help them to process what happened to Rachel. And what occurred next, I can't. Joe O'Reilly starts to reenact what he believes happened to Rachel. He points to the splatter on the ceiling, speculating about how she had been hit in the head. He suggests that the killer had stepped over her, gone to the bathroom to clean up, while listening to Rachel basically suffocate on her own blood, and then returned to the room to finish her off. When they went downstairs, Joe insisted that Rose and Jim listened to the voicemails that he had left for Rachel that day. Every single one. And as they are listening to this, Rose hears Rachel's voice in her head, as clear as a bell. He did it. That night, she talks to her husband, Jim, about what she's feeling, and Jim is absolutely distraught because, remember, he didn't go inside the house before this, so he has these visuals in his head of how everything went now, and sometimes reality is worse than your imagination. So he says to her, people react to grief in different ways. Joe is just distraught. He's in shock at the loss of his wife. So Rose kind of puts her suspicions away, but she never ever stops thinking about them. In the days and weeks following Rachel O'Reilly's death, Joe's behavior gets even stranger. asked Jenny to come up on it. She said that the question took her completely by surprise, and when he pointed out where Rachel's blood had been, she felt physically ill. So why did you go up there, lady? I don't... Another journalist, Kieran O'Brien, visited the house 12 days after the murder, and Joe, posed for pictures in his kitchen, casually discussing being treated like a suspect by the police, and offered yet another tour of the crime scene. Friends and community members who called by the house to offer their condolences, you know how people bring food, received the same unsettling invitation. Joe would walk them through what he believed happened, step by step, room by room. And in fact, this happened so much that the media later dubbed these visits the murder tours. On October 22nd, less than 3 weeks after Rachel's death, Joe appeared on The Late Late Show with Pat Kenny, Ireland's premier primetime talk show, and he sat along Rose Galali, appealing for information about his wife's killer. But it is said that backstage, Joe's demeanor shocked the production staff. He did not appear to be this widow, this man whose wife was murdered, who's in mourning. He helped himself to food and refreshments. He spent the majority of time on his phone, and Jim and Rose could barely even look at a cup of tea at this point, and Joe was perfectly comfortable just chatting it up. During this broadcast, Joe spoke analytically about Rachel's murder. He theorized that she must have known her killer because why would they kill her? It was a violent robbery. Why go to the extreme of murdering the person unless they can identify you? So he's basically saying if it was a stranger danger situation, they wouldn't have hurt her because she didn't know them to identify them later. So what the public doesn't know about this interview is Joe lied about his plans for after the show. He told producers that he needed to go because he needed to meet a client, but he instead spent the night with Nikki Pelly. So he's on TV appealing for information about his wife's death and spending the night directly in his lover's bed. 2 days after this television appearance, police search Joe's office at Viacom. They take his laptop, and what they find in his deleted emails crack this case wide open. Joe O'Reilly had been corresponding with his sister Anne about his marriage, and these emails revealed a depth of hatred that stunned the investigators. Joe used vulgar language and vicious expletives to describe Rachel. He said that she repulsed him and complained to his sister bitterly about their relationship. When Rose learned of these emails, she was absolutely devastated. To hear about her daughter spoken about in such a manner was just horrifying. But these emails were not the most damning evidence in this case. That came from the mobile phone analysis. Investigators contacted O2, Rachel's phone provider, and requested any records or data from the day of her murder. And this helped them to determine which cellular towers Joe's phone connected to throughout the day. And the results were pretty devastating. Joe O'Reilly claimed that he had been at the Broadstone bus depot all morning, but his phone says that was a lie. At 5:45, he left for the gym, and he stopped at a petrol station to fill up his blue Fiat. While there, he got a phone call from Nikki Pelly. The two of them spoke for 28 was his phone connected to a tower near his house. CCTV cameras near Murphy's Quarry captured something else. A blue Fiat passing by at 9:59 a.m., driving away from the direction of Lambay View. Now, the license plate wasn't clear enough to read, but the make and model matched Joe's car exactly. Shortly after the car passed the quarry area, Joe's phone connected to a tower in Broadstone. Only then, investigators believed, did he actually arrive at the location where he said he had been all morning. So at this point, investigators have pieced together what they believe happened the morning of October 4th, 2004. At 9 a.m., Rachel left the house with her two sons. CCTV cameras near Murphy's Quarry captured her car passing by 3 minutes later, headed towards the daycare. At 9:41, the same camera filmed Rachel's car returning home. And investigators believe that her life was ended within minutes of arriving back at their bungalow. Joe, they theorized, had been waiting. He had lied about being at the bus depot, and he'd driven to Knoll instead, parked somewhere out of sight, and entered his own home. When Rachel had made her way into their bedroom, the last room of the house, he was there. He launched his attack from behind, bludgeoning her with a heavy object, quite possibly a dumbbell from their home gym. After this crime, Joe took a shower to wash away any of the evidence, put his clothes and towels in the washing machine. He ransacked their house to create the illusion of a burglary. He collected some jewelry and a camera, drove to a nearby stream, and dumped them in a plastic bag for police to find later. And then he drove back toward Dublin, his phone finally connecting to the towers near the Broadstone depot. At 11:52, he sent Rachel the first of several text messages and voicemails, creating his own alibi. A digital record of a concerned husband trying desperately to reach his wife. When the daycare called at 1:15, Joe had the perfect excuse to seem worried, so he calls his mother-in-law, Rose. He collects his sons. He stalls to make sure that he would not be the one to find his wife's body. In fact, it is said that he planned for Rose to make that terrible discovery instead. In March of 2005, 5 months after the murder, Rachel's family made an extraordinary request. They asked police to exhume Rachel's body to examine the letter that Joe had placed in her coffin. The order was granted, and on March 8th, Rachel's body was removed from her grave. I have to wonder if they regret this, but the letter was extracted and treated with chemicals. Using infrared technologies, investigators finally read what Joe had written. I don't have the full letter, but it was 5 pages, and it included the following passage, quote, "Rachel, I love you so very much. I cannot think what I will ever do without you, and I don't want to. You were the best thing to ever happen to me, and you will never be replaced. This is the hardest letter I've ever had to write. For reasons only we know, Rachel, please forgive me. 2 words, 1 sentence, but I will say them forever." End quote. Do you think he meant I'm sorry? Because I don't think he's sorry. Now, the note was ambiguous, not enough to arrest him, but for Rachel's family, it confirmed everything that they believed. In December of 2005, 14 months after, investigators made a breakthrough with the CCTV footage. The blue Fiat captured near Murphy's Quarry had never been positively identified as Joe's car. The license plate was too blurry. So detectives decide to search Ireland's vehicle registration database for every owner of a blue Fiat Maria. I don't know how to say that. I'm not a car person. And she also said that Joe had once told her, if I killed Rachel, I could get away with it. And of course, Nikki says that she didn't take the comment seriously at the time. In October of 2006, 2 years after Rachel's murder, police arrest Joe O'Reilly. Detective Sergeant Pat Murray arrives at Joe's mother's house, walks into the kitchen, puts his hand on Joe's shoulder, and says, "You're under the arrest for the murder of Rachel O'Reilly." Detective Murray said the blood drained from Joe's face and he went as white as a sheet. Joe O'Reilly pled not guilty, and his trial began June 25th of 2007. The media and public interest in this case was unprecedented. Queues formed every day outside of the courtroom as people tried to secure seats in the public gallery. Rachel's family had not seen Joe in 8 months, and coming face to face with him again was excruciating. Jim described Joe as having a fierce arrogance, and Rose said that he appeared detached. So the defense argued that the The defense argued that the prosecution's case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. I shouldn't use big words in my notes. Nothing more than innuendo, spin, and allegations. But what emerged during this trial painted a devastating portrait of Joe O'Reilly. This man who had meticulously crafted the image of this devoted family man with a murderous rage towards his wife. The phone triangulation evidence was groundbreaking. Never before had an Irish murder trial relied so heavily on cellular tower analysis, and day by day the data systematically dismantled Joe's alibi. The emails to his sister revealed the actual depths of his contempt for his wife, and the texts between Joe and Nikki showed a man planning a future with his mistress, referring to Rachel's children as our boys, as though Rachel had already ceased to exist. More shocking revelations emerged, though. 4 months before Rachel's murder, social services had received an anonymous tip claiming that Rachel was unfit to be a mother, and these allegations were utterly unfounded. But during the trial, it came out that Joe's mother had made this report against Rachel. Joe had emailed his sister about this incident, using profanity to describe Rachel and asking, "How did she get out of this one?" And his response to his sister revealed his true motive. If Joe and Rachel divorced, he likely would not get full custody of his children, and he couldn't cut Rachel out of the picture through legal means, so he found another way. Creep. Rose Galali's testimony was one of the most emotional moments of this trial, as you can imagine. She described arriving at the Lambay View house and finding her daughter's body, and Joe's first words as he arrived were, "Jesus, Rachel, what did you do?" Who says that? So even in that moment, Rose testified, Joe's response seemed wrong. Why would he ask Rachel what she had done, as though she had brought this upon herself? Professor Marie Cassidy, Ireland's former state pathologist, provided crucial testimony. Her analysis confirmed what Joe had described during his murder tours, that the killer had indeed likely heard Rachel suffocating on her own blood and returned to strike her again. Joe had known details that only the killer would know. Fiona Slevin testified about a conversation she'd had with Joe on the day of Rachel's funeral. Joe had told her, "I don't know why they're looking in the fields. The murder weapon is in the water." And Fiona said it felt like Joe had kind of revealed something he shouldn't have, and he quickly backpedaled and said, "Well, if I did it, that's where it would be. There's water all around. That would get rid of the DNA." No, you creep. You... supporters cheered. Joe O'Reilly was sentenced to life in prison. Outside of the courthouse, the scenes were extraordinary. Rachel's family surrounded by well-wishers, reporters, cameras, everybody. And Rose Galali, composed despite her tears, spoke to the press. "We'd love to thank everybody," she said. "The police in particular have been so brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And the prosecution team and all the people of Ireland that have been behind us with cards, letters, and prayers. It all meant so much to us. At long last, we've gotten justice for our darling Rachel." Joe O'Reilly was driven to Mountjoy Prison in Dublin to begin his life sentence, and the family watched as the prison van carried him away. This case captured Ireland's attention like few others before it. The mobile phone triangulation evidence had been revolutionary at the time, and the image of a seemingly devoted husband and father systematically destroying his wife while maintaining a public facade had horrified the nation. For the Galali family, the verdict brought some measure of closure. However, their pain was far from over. Joe O'Reilly has attempted multiple appeals in his case, and in each instance, he has been unsuccessful. He took his case to the Court of Appeals, and he was denied. He tried to take it to the Supreme Court, and he was refused. In October of 2016, he reportedly abandoned plans to appeal to the European courts. In May of 2015, an appeal to have his conviction declared a miscarriage of justice was rejected. He's been denied parole 3 times at least, and Rachel's family continues to oppose any release, attending every parole hearing to ensure that he remains behind bars. And if you're wondering, Nikki Pelly initially stood by her ban. In 2012, Joe's brother Derek told the media that Nikki still loved Joe and believed in his innocence, as did Derek himself. He said, quote, "The Joe I know is not a scumbag. He's most definitely not a devil, and he's not an abuser. The Joe O'Reilly I know is anything but the ultimate evil." Nikki visited Joe in prison for years, every week. And then in 2017, their relationship ended. They briefly reconciled before ending things in 2022, but sources say that they remain close friends. Unfortunately for the Galali family, tragedy wasn't over yet. In 2010, Rose and Jim's other daughter, Anne, passed away at the age of 31 after following a battle with cancer. Her death came just 2 weeks before the anniversary of Rachel's murder. Rose later described how deeply Rachel's murder had affected Anne. "As soon as our Rachel died, our Anne used to arrive up at the door at 3 or 4 in the morning. She was petrified and afraid. She never rested. She always thought she could hear noises of someone trying to get in the house." So the loss of both daughters within 6 years is almost unimaginable to think about. In the years following Joe's trial, Rose published a book titled Remembering Rachel, the story of Rachel O'Reilly's life and brutal death. And she said, "I don't want anyone to ever forget what was done to Rachel in any shape or form." This book serves both as a memorial to Rachel and a testament to a mother's love. Through its pages, Rose ensures that Rachel is remembered not as a victim, but as a vibrant, adventurous, loving person. Rachel's sons, who were 2 and 4 when their mother was murdered, have grown up knowing the truth about their father. The Galali family has worked to ensure that the boys understand who their mother was, her warmth and athletic achievements, and devotion to them. The bungalow at Lambstown View stands as a quiet monument to that terrible day. The community of Knoll, forever changed by Rachel's murder, has not forgotten her. Joe O'Reilly remains in Mountjoy Prison. He continues to maintain his innocence, despite the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. He has shown no remorse for Rachel's death. So, let's talk about this a little bit. This case really reminded me of Chris Watts, and I don't know if it's because Nikki and Nicole and whatever, but it's just like, I just don't get it. No matter how many times I report on a case like this to you guys, and I tell you about mostly the husband murdering the wife, I just don't ever understand. Just get a freaking divorce. Like, I understand that you wanted full-time custody of your kids or whatever. Okay, then you take it to court and you work out some kind of deal. You don't murder your wife. I honestly think that this man thought that he got away with the perfect murder and that he would be absolutely free to live his life with his boys and Nikki. And that makes me sick. That makes me want to punch him in his face, and I don't even know what he looks like. I hardly ever look into the perpetrators much in cases like this because I don't want to know. And I carry some of these cases so heavily with myself that I take them when I go to sleep at night and I see these perpetrators' faces and I see these victims and their kids, and like, I know the names of the two kids in this case, but I'm not gonna tell you them because this happened to them. It's not about them, and it's, you know, something terrible that they've had to deal with their whole lives. So I really try sometimes to just leave those little tiny details out, just out of respect for the families. But this is one of those cases that I just will never, ever understand. And it is incredibly sad and kind of defeating to know that this man could get out of jail and continue to do whatever he wants. I just can't. Ugh. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me tonight on the channel. If you're new here and you're looking for more content from me, did I say this at the beginning? I have a Patreon, and that is where you'll find all of my rambles and all that stuff. Usually, I post all of my experimental videos there, and I ramble a lot, usually every other week. And you can join us as low as $2 a month. No pressure, just letting you know if you're looking for weekly videos, that's where you go. I did start filming for our poll of the World's 100 Greatest Mysteries book, and that will be out maybe this coming week, but probably the week after. I have filmed the first part, as you can see, but I've got to film the second part, so the video is longer for you guys. Again, I love you so much. If you're still listening,